Guys, Jesus has returned to hang out with this one lady. Is it worth watching? Find out when I look at Nikki and the Perfect Stranger on this week's Indy Christian Review. Once again, a huge thank you to my supporters on Patreon for making this show possible. If you're a fan of what I do here and you want to join the growing community we've got over there, head on over to patreon.com/storyteller. I'd really appreciate it. In a lot of Christian movies, the end goal of the story is to get the character to a point where they accept Jesus. But as we believers know, that's really only the beginning of the journey. So what happens when time goes on and passions begin to cool? Well, that's the dilemma faced by returning protagonist Nikki Kaminsky. In the first movie, well-off lawyer Nikki Kaminsky receives an invitation to have dinner with Jesus Christ. Thinking it was just a prank, Nikki went, only to eventually discover that the man she was eating with was indeed Jesus himself. Their ensuing conversation eventually led to Nikki believing in Jesus and becoming a Christian. About 10 years later, Nikki's daughter Sarah found herself at a crossroads as she was heading off to college. Well, she ended up sharing a flight with none other than Jesus himself. Now, as we get into the third movie, the timeline's a little fuzzy. It talks about the first movie having taken place 10 years prior, but then it mentions that Sarah's been at college for a few years, but in the second movie, it's been 10 years, so let's just say it's been some time later. Over the years, Nikki's found herself not feeling as close to the Lord as she used to, and she finds herself slipping back into old habits. After a particularly bad blow-up at her unsupportive mother, Nikki starts the long drive home. After a while, her car breaks down, and none other than Jesus himself appears. After gassing up her car, Jesus joins her for the ride, and the conversation begins once again. I really like how these movies have progressed. The first one was a very basic introductory level to Christianity. The second one was more of a mid-level, how to deal with grief and restoring a broken faith. The third one doesn't deal so much with a broken faith as it does a stagnant one. Nikki's at a point where I think anyone who's been a believer for a long time can relate to. Over time, the fire dies down, passion becomes routine. It's not that we stop believing in Jesus, it's just not as big of a deal anymore. And deep down, Nikki knows that she really shouldn't be feeling this way because, she had dinner with God. There are some sequels out there that work as standalone movies. You don't necessarily have to have seen the first one to get the second one, like The Encounter 2. But with Nikki and the Perfect Stranger, you're going to want to have at least seen the first one before you come into this one so you can have a better appreciation for Nikki's story. Just exercise your suspension of disbelief and pretend that they're played by the same person. Just like the other Perfect Stranger movies, the conversations are very well written and flow very naturally. Again, these are all based on books where you can get away with characters having long conversations. Harder to pull that off in a movie, but they do it pretty well. It's very well shot and acted, and as someone who's been a believer for almost 20 years now, I could relate to a lot of the questions that Nikki had for Jesus. Nikki and the Perfect Stranger, like its predecessors, is definitely worth watching, and I highly recommend it. Links below this video for where you can buy your own copy. And that's all the time we have. Thank you for watching Indy Christian Review. Until next week, I'm the Storyteller. May God bless you, and may God bless independent Christian films.